السلام علیکم. سافٹ ویئر پروجیکٹ مینجمنٹ کورس اور آج کا ٹاپک ہے پلاننگ. اگر ہم یہ کہیں کہ پروڈکٹ ڈیزائن از اے کرنل آف سافٹ ویئر انجینئرنگ دین پلاننگ از دا موسٹ کریٹیکل فیکٹر آف پروجیکٹ سافٹ ویئر مینجمنٹ. تو اگر آپ کا پروڈکٹ ڈیزائن اچھا ہے، ٹیکنیکلی ساؤنڈ ہے، دیٹ مینس آپ کی جو پروڈکٹ اس ڈیزائن کے نتیجے میں بنے گی دیٹ از دا ون وچ یو ہیو آلریڈی پلانڈ فار. بٹ ان آرڈر ٹو کریٹ اور ڈیولپ دیٹ پروڈکٹ یو ہیو ٹو ڈو سرٹن تھنگس. امنگ آل دوز پلاننگ از دا کریٹیکلی موسٹ امپارٹنٹ. آپ کے پروجیکٹ کی سکسیز ایز اے پروجیکٹ مینیجر، آپ کی اچیومنٹ اور کسی بھی سافٹ ویئر پروجیکٹس کا سکسیزفل ہونا ایز اے ہول ڈپینڈ کرتا ہے کہ ہاؤ گڈ دا تھنگز ہیز بین پلانڈ ٹو پروڈیوس دوز گڈز اینڈ سروسز. پلاننگ کے اوپر ہم ڈیٹیل سے بات کریں گے، بٹ لیٹ می ریمائنڈ یو وٹ وی ہیو ڈسکس سو فار. پچھلے جو ہم ٹاپک ڈسکس کر چکے ہیں، پہلے ہم نے اوور ویو آف مینجمنٹ وہ ڈسکس کیا تھا. اس ماڈیول یا ٹاپک کو ڈیٹیل سے ڈسکس کرنے کا جو ریفرنسز دینے کا مقصد یہ تھا کہ یو ایز اے پروجیکٹ مینیجر مسٹ انڈرسٹینڈ دا بیسک فنڈامنٹلز، بیسک کانسیپٹس، ٹاسک، ٹولز اینڈ ادر پیرامیٹرز اور ادر ایکٹیویٹیز ویچ آر کریٹیکلی امپارٹینٹ ٹو مینیج دا تھنگس. پھر اس کو سافٹ ویئر پروجیکٹ کو مینیج کرنے کے لیے ہم نے کچھ چیزیں ریلیٹ کی تھیں اور اس کے ریلیشنس کو ہم نے تھوڑا سا ڈسکس کیا تھا ود ریفرنس ٹو سافٹ ویئر ڈیولپمنٹ فنڈامنٹلز. دیکھیں، ایوری باڈی کین ناٹ بیکم اے سافٹ ویئر پروجیکٹ مینیجر. آلدو all the good people having some experience and technically skilled can manage any kind of project, but other way around is not true. To manage a complex software project, it's critically important the person must have the required skill, experience, knowledge and vision how a software development project is managed. تو سافٹ ویئر ڈیولپمنٹ کے فنڈامنٹلس کو اسپیکٹس ہم نے جو ریویو کیا تھا. non-IT or non-software expert, for him it's very difficult to manage a software project. تو اس کے لیے IT skilled ہونا بہت ضروری ہے. وہ ہم نے وہ ریفر کیا تھا. اور بنیادی طور پہ سافٹ ویئر انجینئرنگ کا جو کچھ کنسیپٹس تھے وہ ہم نے سافٹ ویئر فنڈامنٹلز میں، ڈیولپمنٹ فنڈامنٹل میں ڈسکس کیے تھے. دین وی ٹاکڈ اباؤٹ دا پروسیسز کہ ایز اے پروجیکٹ مینیجر جب آپ نے کوئی سافٹ ویئر ڈیولپمنٹ پروجیکٹ کو ٹیک اپ کرنا ہے، واٹ آر دا پروسیسز وچ یو ہیو ٹو کنسیڈر. اب باری آتی ہے پلاننگ کی. اینڈ دا موسٹ امپارٹینٹ تھنگ، کوئی بھی پروجیکٹ جب آپ نے مینیج کرنا ہے، ایگزیکیوٹ کرنا ہے یا سپروائز کرنا ہے، یو ایز اے پروجیکٹ مینیجر ریسپانسبل ٹو کمپلیٹ دا پروجیکٹ ایکٹیویٹیز اینڈ ڈیلیور وٹ ایور ہیز بین آسکڈ فار. تو اس سلسلے میں اب ہم ڈسکس کریں گے کہ پلاننگ کے ڈفرینٹ فیچر اسپیکٹس کیا ہیں. ایک چیز ذرا ذہن میں رکھیے گا کہ ہم آج کے سیشن میں اور آئندہ آنے والے سیشن میں پلاننگ کے ریفرنس سے جو بھی چیزیں ڈسکس کریں گے ان کا پریکٹیکل اسپیکٹ جو ہے وہ آپ کو کنسیڈر کرنا ہے. مقصد تھیوری سمجھانا نہیں. سو اٹس ویری امپارٹینٹ فار یو دیٹ ناٹ اونلی یو گو تھرو آل دا ریفرنس مٹیریل وچ ول بی ریفرڈ during the course of instructions, but also it's equally important that you must visit the reference sites and you should do the extra reading. پلاننگ کے لیے ضروری ہے کہ آپ کو وہ تمام پاسبل ریسورسز ان کو ریویو کرنا چاہیے. You must have access to all available information. اب یہ all available information کا کنسیپٹ بھی ریلیٹیو ہے. It depends upon to what extent you have explored different options. پلاننگ ایگزسٹنگ فیکٹس کے اوپر نہیں کی جاتی. دیٹ از ون اسپیکٹ. ان فیکٹ پلاننگ آلسو انکلوڈ دا پاسٹ ہسٹری، ریلیونٹ اسکل ایریاز، ریفرنسز اینڈ تھنگز لائک دیٹ. تو ان تمام چیزوں کو اوور ویو کرنے کے بعد اینڈ دین ڈپینڈنگ اپان دا پروجیکٹ ریکوائرمنٹ، وہ جو پروڈکٹ ہے یا جو آپ نے پروجیکٹ کو ایگزیکیوٹ کرنا ہے اس کی اپنی نیچر ہوگی، اس کی اپنی کمپلیکسٹی ہے، اس کی ریکوائرمنٹ کیا ہے، اس کو ذہن میں رکھتے ہوئے آپ کو پلان کرنا ہوگا. پلاننگ از ناٹ اے اسمال تھنگ. اٹ اسٹارٹس فرام دا ڈے ون ایون بیفور اسٹارٹ آف دا پروجیکٹ اینڈ اٹ ول گو آن ٹل دا کمپلیشن آف دا پروجیکٹ. تو ان چیزوں کو اب ہم تفصیل سے دیکھیں گے، بٹ لیٹ می جسٹ ریفر ریڈ آؤٹ ون فریز فار یو، اور اس کو آپ ایز اے پروجیکٹ مینیجر ہمیشہ ذہن میں رکھنا ہے، اینڈ دیٹ از پلانز آر نتھنگ بٹ پلاننگ از ایوری تھنگ. اس کو اگر آپ سمجھ لیں گے تو اس سے آپ کو ایک افیکٹو پلاننگ کسی بھی کمپلیکس سافٹ ویئر پروجیکٹ کو کنسیو کرنے میں جو ہے نا یہ مدد ملے گی. چند اور کنسیپٹ یا باتیں جو پلاننگ کے ریفرنس سے ہیں وہ میں دہرانا چاہوں گا ابھی، پھر ہم بعد میں اس کے پلاننگ کے اسپیکٹس اور ڈفرینٹ فیچر ڈسکس کریں گے. پلاننگ از ان فیکٹ ون آف دا موسٹ امپارٹنٹ مینجمنٹ ایکٹیویٹی. ایز اے پروجیکٹ مینیجر یو ڈو اے لاٹ آف ایکٹیویٹیز، بٹ پلاننگ از دا موسٹ امپارٹنٹ ایکٹیویٹی اینڈ از این آن گوئنگ ایفرٹ تھرو آؤٹ دا لائف آف پروجیکٹ. جب آپ کوئی بھی پروجیکٹ کو امپلیمنٹ کرتے ہیں، دیر آر ڈفرینٹ ایکٹیویٹیز which are performed at different levels. آپ کو یاد ہوگا ہم نے فیزز کی بات کی تھی، ہم نے پروسیس ڈومینس کی بھی بات کی تھی. تو دے آر دا ایکٹیویٹیز جو ایک فیز میں اسٹارٹ ہوئیں، اس کے نتیجے میں ایک آؤٹ پٹ جنریٹ ہوئی، دین نیکسٹ فیز کم اینڈ اندر ایکٹیویٹی اسٹارٹس. بٹ دا پلاننگ ایکٹیویٹی اٹ کیریز آن. تو اس کا مطلب کیا ہوا کہ ہم پلاننگ کو اسٹارٹ میں جو پلان بنایا اس کے اوپر تمام پروجیکٹ کو ایگزیکیوٹ کریں گے، یا از دیر اینی آپشن اور چانس دیٹ اے plans or planning can be updated? Practically, yes. آپ کی initial planning ہوگی and that planning as and when required can be updated, modified to meet the progressive elaboration of the project activities. آپ کو یاد ہوگا شروع میں جو ہم نے پروجیکٹ کی ایک پروڈکٹ کی جو نا ڈیفینیشن جو تھی وہ ہم نے ڈسکس کی تھی. ون آف دا فیچر واز دیر شوڈ بی اے پروگریسو ایلیبریشن. تو یہ پلاننگ جو ہے اس کو ٹیکل کرتا ہے جوں پروجیکٹ کی ایگزیکیوشن کے دوران میں ڈفرینٹ سینیریو ڈیولپ ہوتے ہیں، یا دیر کوڈ بی سم لمیٹیشن، سم کانسٹینٹس، انفورسین تھنگس کم اپ. اب آپ کو رسک انالیسز کے سلسلے میں آپ نے کچھ رسک بھی آئیڈینٹیفائی کیے ہوں گے. رسک کی نیچر، میگنیچیوڈ ڈفرینٹ ہو گیا جو آپ نے پہلے ایکسپیکٹ کیا تھا، پلان کیا تھا. ان تمام چیزوں کو اب ٹیکل کرنے کے لیے دین یو ہیو ٹو ری ورک یور پلان. So plans are not the rules. یہ یاد رکھیں، پلاننگ is not a combination of rules. Plans are set of activities which you have to perform in a specific way. ایک اور امپارٹنٹ پوائنٹ اس میں یہ ہے کہ سافٹ ویئر پروجیکٹ مینجمنٹ begins with a set of activities that are collectively called project planning. یہ اس کو اگر ہم بائی ڈیفینیشن کہیں تو ہم پروجیکٹ پلاننگ کو اس طریقے سے فریز کر سکتے ہیں. Preliminary planning starts on day one, even in the pre-project phase. ابھی آپ نے پروجیکٹ اسٹارٹ کرنا ہے، آپ کو یاد ہوگا انیشیشن آف دا پروجیکٹ ایکٹیویٹیز ہم نے ریفر کیا تھا. آپ کی پلاننگ اس سے پہلے ہی اسٹارٹ ہو جائے گی. It should not be conducted in secrets. You will not achieve the objectives the way you want. Planning should be open. Everybody should know about the plans and the planning process. And it needs buy-in and approvals. وہ پلان اچھا نہیں ہے، وہ پلاننگ افیکٹو نہیں ہے اگر اس کی اپروول جو ہے کنسرنڈ اتھارٹیز سے نہیں ملی. نہ صرف اتھارٹیز سے بلکہ جتنے بھی اسٹیک ہولڈرز ہیں، all those stakeholders who could be the sponsors, users اور the organization heads. buy-in کا مطلب یہ ہے کہ آپ پلاننگ میں ایز پر ریکوائرمنٹ کس طریقے سے اکوموڈیٹ کریں گے ڈفرینٹ لمیٹیشنس کے جو رسپانسز ہیں کہ یور پلاننگ بیکمز ایکسیپٹیبل ٹو دا کنسرنڈ اتھارٹیز. تو یہ ایک بیسک ہم نے پلاننگ کا جو ہے نا کنسیپٹ تھا وہ ہم نے فیو پوائنٹ ڈسکس کیے. ناؤ لیٹس ٹاک اباؤٹ ان ڈیٹیل دا پروجیکٹ پلاننگ آبجیکٹیوز. آبجیکٹیو سے ہم اسٹارٹ کرتے ہیں. وٹ آر دا پلاننگ آبجیکٹیو؟ دا آبجیکٹیو آف سافٹ ویئر پروجیکٹ پلاننگ از ٹو پرووائڈ اے فریم ورک دیٹ انیبلز دا مینیجرز ٹو میک reasonable estimate of resources, cost and schedule. یہ اب آپ کا جو ہے ایک فریم ورک ہے جو کسی بھی سافٹ ویئر پروجیکٹ پلاننگ کا ایک کی ایٹریبیوٹ جو ہے نا وہ کہلائے گا. These estimates are made within a limited time frame at the beginning of the software project and should be updated regularly as the project progress. تو انیشل آپ نے پلاننگ کر لی with respect to a time frame. آپ کو پتہ ہے کہ سافٹ ویئر پروجیکٹ ایک لمیٹیڈ، کوئی بھی پروجیکٹ ایک لمیٹیڈ سائیکل میں جو ہے نا کمپلیٹ ہونا ہوتا ہے. When you do the estimation, of course you talk about with reference to the time frame. اب وہ ٹائم فریم ڈپینڈنگ اپان دا ریسورس انپٹ ریکوائرڈ اس کے مطابق اپڈیٹ ہو سکتا ہے. تو دیٹ مینس وین وی ٹاک اباؤٹ پلانس دوز کین بی موڈیفائڈ, دوز کین بی اپڈیٹڈ ایز دا پروجیکٹ ایکٹیویٹی گوز آن. ان ایڈیشن ایسٹیمیٹ شوڈ اٹیمپٹ ٹو ڈیفائن بیسٹ کیس اینڈ دا ورسٹ کیس سینیریوز. آپ کو ایکسٹریم سچویشن کو سامنے رکھ کے ایسٹیمیشن کرنی ہوگی اباؤٹ دا ریسورسز, کاسٹ اینڈ اسکیڈولنگ, so that the outcome can be a bounded and a practical in nature. تو یہ آبجیکٹیوز ہیں جو کسی بھی پروجیکٹ پلانرس کو اپنے ذہن میں رکھنے چاہیے. اینڈ دین پلاننگ کین بی ڈیفائنڈ ان اندر وے, اینڈ دیٹ از اٹ از ون آف دا موسٹ امپارٹنٹ مینجمنٹ ایکٹیویٹی اینڈ از آن گوئنگ ایفرٹ تھرو آؤٹ دا لائف آف دا پروجیکٹ. پلاننگ کا یا پلان کا مطلب یہ نہیں کہ آپ نے شروع میں جو پلان بنا دیا, دس ایکٹیویٹی or this phase of activity is complete now. No, it's not like that. Your plan and your planning will carry on with the project development, and you might be required to revise your planning strategies and planning parameters jo different honge. Software project planners must estimate at least the following before any project begins, and that is how much will it cost. Pehla step to ye as a project manager, of course you should be cost conscious. دیکھیں کہ how much it is going to cost. Second, how long will it take. اس کا تعلق ٹائم کے ساتھ ہو گیا. How many people will it take. Now HR requirement are going to be analyzed. What might go wrong. کوئی بھی ایکٹیویٹی ہے جو بھی some risk, آپ اس کو anticipate کریں اور اس کو delineate کریں تاکہ آپ کو پتہ چل جائے کہ جب کوئی بھی پروجیکٹ ایگزیکیوشن اسٹارٹ ہوگی تو unforeseen یا رسک اور ڈیفیکلٹیز اور کانسٹینٹس جو ہے وہ آپ کے ڈیولپمنٹ پروسیس کو ڈسٹرب نہ کریں. اب ہم بات کر لیتے ہیں کہ بیسکس جو ہیں پروجیکٹ پلاننگ کے, بیسک ڈیفینیشن کیا ہے اس کی. ا فیو کنسیپٹس آن دیٹ. بفور وی پروسیڈ فردر, لیٹس ٹاک اباؤٹ سم ڈیفینیشنز اور دا کنسیپٹس بیہائنڈ پروجیکٹ پلاننگ. واٹ از اٹ؟ سافٹ ویئر پروجیکٹ پلاننگ انوالوز ایسٹیمیشن. یور اٹیمپٹ ٹو ڈیٹرمن ہاؤ مچ منی, ہاؤ مچ ایفرٹ, ہاؤ مچ ریسورسز and how much time it will take to build a specific software-based system or product. Second, who does it? You, as a project manager, are responsible to do the things like that. In fact, using information solicited from customers and software engineers and software metrics data collected from past projects are the key elements which are used by the project manager to develop a software product. Why is it important, the project planning? It's a very simple example. If you want to build a house without knowing how much you are about to spend, are you going to start this activity? Certainly not. Unless you are sure that you have enough funds to complete the construction of a house, you will hesitate or you will defer the construction of a house. Constructing a house or a similar project like that doesn't cost much. But remember, development of a complex project costs a lot. It's not only the money which is involved, there are so many other resources which are involved at a critical time in a certain amount, having certain values. So without planning, starting a software development project will not lead towards a successful story. What are the steps which are involved in project planning? A key steps I'm going to describe now, and the detail will be followed later on. To start with that, the estimation begins with the description of the scope of product. So that is the most important step. You must know what is the scope of product, and then the estimation process starts. Until the scope is bounded, it is not possible to develop a meaningful estimate. So you have to be sure about the scope, and bounded means you have to make the boundaries. You must understand that these are the limits. Beyond that, this scope is not going to work, so that your cost estimation, time estimation becomes more effective. The problem is then decomposed into a set of smaller problems. and each of these is estimated using historical data and experience as guides. And these are important steps. It is also advisable to generate your estimate using at least 2 different methods, just to have a cross-check. Problem complexity and the risk are considered before a final estimate is made. So these are some of the important steps in this regard for project planning we are talking about. Now let's talk about what is the work product as a result of project planning. A simple table delineating the tasks to be performed, the functions to be implemented, and the cost, effort, and time involved for each is generated. You must have a matrix which will be the outcome of your planning activity. In fact, a list of required project resources is also produced as part of deliverable of that project planning. Now, you as a project manager would like to think, how do I ensure that I have done it right? That is hard because you won't really know until the project has been completed. However, if you have experience and follow a certain procedures and the task, you will be at a comfortable position. What are those procedural tasks? First is, you must adapt a systematic approach for project planning. You should generate estimates using solid historical data, no hearsay, no untold or unrealistic assumptions. The historical data should be your backbone for making some decision or estimations. Create estimation data points using at least 2 different methods. Factor in complexity and risk should also be considered. So if you go through with these, consider these factors, then probably the project planning matrix which you are going to develop is going to guide you to a success, to a project success. You can feel confident that you have done a right job to achieve the target if you follow, we just mentioned some key steps around. Now we talk about some key 12-step program which we can say a project planning should include. The first is, as a project manager, you must consider set goals and scope. You should be very clear about that. What are the goals of this assignment and what is the scope of the product or the services going to be developed. Select life cycles. As a software expert, as a software IT student, now you very clearly understand that no project can be completed if proper life cycles are not selected for that. We will discuss in a following later on that how you can select a life cycle. Set organization team form. In order to complete the project, how many people, what kind of people are required? You have to plan that. Start team selections. After identifying the HR resources required for the project, then team building process needs to be established. Who is going to work with whom and who is going to report to whom and what are the TOR for all the teams. You have to determine the risks. It's highly unlikely that a software project doesn't have any risk. You must analyze that, gauge that, and have some sort of alternative measures in case of certain risky situation you face during project execution. We have mentioned so many times that the software projects are complex in nature and these software projects are required to be broken down into some interrelated activities. These are the concepts related to the work breakdown structures. You are already familiar with that. Under software engineering, I'm sure you must have done some exercises on that. Identify the tasks. Identification of tasks means the people who are involved to work on a certain phase, activity or the process, they should be knowing what they have to do, what they have to deliver and when they have to deliver. What is their task for the creation of a byproduct or a final product. Task also relates with the responsibility. So you have to identify the task. Then estimate the size of the task or the activities being performed. Estimate the efforts. Effort not only in terms of duration, but also in terms of technical input. Do you need a person who is just a fresh graduate? He or she may put 100% effort to work on that assignment. Or the project requirement is somebody seasoned, experienced, technically skilled must put his or her effort. So estimating the effort, whose effort are going to be required for that particular project activity, that you have to determine. If you recall, during management, we talked about that you must have a skilled people, you must have experienced people, and you must ensure not only the supervisor, team leaders, and other critically important people, their training or their experience with respect to specific project activity is equally important. So that is also directly related with the estimation of the efforts. How good the team you have developed, how relevant the team you have taken on board, so that their effort can be made compatible with the requirement. Then identify task dependencies. When different individual or group of people are working on different assignments, and so many tasks are going to be generated, and naturally, if we talk about the time frame, there are certain tasks which are performing at the early stage, and there are other tasks which might be performed at a later stage, and in between, input from one task is going to be used as output from one task is going to be used as input for the other task. So all these dependencies for the task, action or their outputs needs to be identified very clearly. And then assign resources. We are not just talking about the human resource, we are talking about all the technically related material, equipment and other usable things must be assigned to as per the activities you have defined. And lastly, schedule the work. All these things should be now put on a table with reference to the time frame. So these are the critically important 12-step programs which are the fundamentals of any project planning activity. Now we talk about project management process. You can see an illustration on the screen. Why, what, how. Then you have a do it, and at the bottom on that illustration you see did it or what we have done. Why means deliverables. Why you want to start this process? Why you want to do this activity? That is the deliverable. What? Scope of work, requirements. Those led to the planning process. And why means initiating process. How? Design. It's a product design. It's a specification we are talking about. It's a software development plan we are talking about. It's a life cycle. How these things are going to be developed. Things mean that service or the product or the facility which is going to be generated or produced as a project management process. Do. What do you have to do? Execute the project, control the project activities. And lastly, what you have done it? Project closing and completion report. So that is a one-page illustration which actually tells the project planning activities which should be delineated. The second now you can see on the screen is a planning puzzle. If you look at its estimation we are talking about, schedule is another factor, scoping, project scoping is the third, fourth is the control strategy, and the last the risk involved. If you put all these things in a proper positions and you are in a position to control all these elements and tasks, that means your project planning is going to succeed, hopefully. So those are some concepts regarding to project planning. Now we move to the another important aspect of that, and that is primary planning steps. What are the steps involved in project plan? First is outline the activities, tasks, dependencies and time frame. That covers your project plan as a whole. Second, resource plan. List all the HR, labor functions, activities, equipment required for that activity and the material required. You must have all the details with reference to their specification, their quantities and their delivery schedules. And then the financial plan. Identify labor, equipment and material cost. These should be worked out as per the actual requirement. We are not talking about hypothetical now. If you have done the estimations, if you have already figured out what is the scope and you have all the activities breakdown structure you have done, then you must plan the cost estimations in a proper way. Without quality or without ensuring the quality, your product, service or facility is not going to be accepted by the user or the client. So you have to provide quality targets, assurance and control measures. There must be a plan for that. Risk plan, separately discussed. Highlight potential risks and actions taken to mitigate them. First, highlight what are the possible risks. Other is what are the solutions if some risky situation arises. What are your mitigation plans to provide those risks or provide some alternates against the unforeseen or constant or project hindering activities which are creating problems for the execution of the project. And lastly, there should be acceptance plan. List the criteria. Criteria word is very important. List the criteria to be met to gain customer acceptance. This criteria will vary depending upon the stakeholder, product, scope, and environmental organizational situations. But as a project manager, you must be knowing that there should be some criteria, some guidelines, some checklist which should be presented and got accepted from the users, not only from the users, from the sponsors, stakeholders, and your higher authorities who are going to approve the final. Then communication plan. We have talked about the importance of the communication. If your project is complex in nature and you have so many people or group involved, there must be an effective communication system. And that system can only be implemented if you have a communication plan. List the information needed to inform stakeholders. Not only the stakeholder, let me go beyond that. You must have a communication plan which should also give information to if you have outsourced any activity, so your partner outside the firm should also be known about the necessary required information. So users and other team members, the group members, they should also be knowing about the project activities or the related information. Procurement plan. In software development projects, it's quite logical that when you start activity, you might be requiring a new software tools. There could be some more efficient, faster or equipment which is required. And you know, as technology keeps on changing, it's possible that the last project which your team has done, now the new equipment are required. Not only the equipment, environment, application scenario has been changed. A new system has been introduced. Then all such things, whether it's the software or the hardware or the intermediaries, there must be a procurement plan to buy all those things timely and in cost-effective way. Procurement plan also includes all the new things, products or the systems which are going to be procured. Their necessarily required training and the maintenance should also be incorporated into that procurement plan, so that once a new piece of item or requirement arrives, the user must be fully trained and accustomed to use it once that facility is installed. Most of the time, in procurement plan, these things are missing. But you as a smart project manager must ensure if the new product is going to be introduced, their necessary required training, operation and maintenance facilities must be ensured at the time of installation. So procurement plan, in fact, before you start ordering the things, at this point the project has been planned in detail and is ready to be executed, so that when the hardware comes in, then you are in a position to execute the planning activity. So those were some critically important steps which we have discussed. Now we are going to move to another important aspect of the project planning, and that is software development plan, or abbreviatedly we call it SDP. Every project planner is familiar with that SDP. Without having a software development plan, complex nature software project cannot be executed in a cost-effective way, in a timely fashion, and Without having a planning, you might run into a trouble where even specification may not be met and there could be some chaos at the end of project activity. Essentially, they are the 10 points or the key points which constitute a software development plan. Let me go through very quickly, then we will discuss one by one in detail. And the first point is the information needed. Second, the steps or item required. Third, the inputs to the software development plan. Fourth is the tools and techniques for software development plans. Then we have outputs from the software development plan. Then comes the execution part, that is the SDP execution. What are the inputs which are required to SDP execution? Then tools and techniques for SDP execution, and finally outputs from SDP execution. And lastly, the elements of SDP. So these are the 10 points which generally constitute a software development plan. The project development plan is basically the first formal document produced by the project. With this document, the project manager describes in detail 3 important things. First, how the project will be developed. Secondly, what resources will be required. And third, how these resources will be used. So these things are discussed in detail in the SDP or the software development plan. Now let's talk about one by one what are the key inputs, tasks or activities which are associated with these 10 elements of a software development plan. The first one we talked about SDP information needs. Basically 7 factors are included into that. The first one is the introduction and status of plan. When you prepare a software development plan, top of the agenda is what is the status of the plan. Then authorization procedures. Who is authorized to do what? Financially, administratively, logistically. This is very important. And all these informations are recorded in that plan. These could be by post, by designation or by person. Authorization, ये वहाँ पे जो discuss होंगे. Third is the statement of project objectives. In fact, if you have a very clearly written down objectives and you are sure about the project scope and the charter, things become very easy for you. In order to achieve a clear objectives, you can be sure what resources you require, and vis-a-vis you are in a position to estimate better to achieve those objectives. So the statement of project activities in the project plan are described preferably in a quantitative and technical form. These objectives are not general in nature now. Statement of requirement. What is required? Along with their specification, quantity, time, effort, all these things are mentioned in this plan. Deliverables in the project. After knowing the plan status, after taking care of the objectives and estimating, understanding the requirement, then comes the deliverables. You should be very clear about that. A work breakdown structure is part of SDP information needs. In earlier session, a while ago, we discussed the complex problems are broken down into a simpler problem or activities. These are the work breakdown structure so that you are in a position to better gauge the estimated value of cost, time and the effort. So work breakdown structure is part of that SDP information needs. And lastly, the project milestones. What are the project milestones? So these 7 things are required in the beginning to develop that software development plan. Not only these, but a few more we can add into those. For example, resource requirement, interdependencies of work, timetable of the events to be happening, staffing, organization and responsibilities, development methods and tool sets to be used, source documentation, resource and financial summary. All these are the inputs for which we call it the information needs. If you don't have information about these listed items, then your plan might have some deficiencies, or you may not be in a position to defend or buy in whatever you have planned. The second aspect of SDP is steps or items required. First is the system review. When you are making a SDP or software development plan, you must have some report, summary, information related to the situation audit. If we are going to produce a facility or service or product for an organization, there must be some feasibility initial studies. Why they need that product? That study tells what was the situation at the time of deciding to get this particular facility or product developed. तो आपको एज ए प्रोजेक्ट मैनेजर पता होना चाहिए कि what were the reports, what were the comments, what were the recommendations, or what were the outcome of the situation audit reports for that product. And the logical step to that is the gap analysis. So what were the shortcomings, deficiencies, or missing things which were identified as a result of situation audit and then recommended to go for developing this particular product you have been assigned. The second is software development management. After having a system review, then you have to talk about, number one, project organization and resources. You should know what is the organization, what are the resources available. Development facilities, overall, technical, environmental, logistical facilities which are available to the development team. Project organization structure, how all these people who are going to be assigned on developing on the project development, what is their structure? Personnel, within the team, outside the team, within the organization, or the external users. All these people combinedly calling personnel, you as a project manager must gauge, must go through with that, and you must have information. Personnel also includes the people who are representing different stakeholders, sponsors. Don't forget them also. They are also part, you should be knowing that. Third aspect in this regard is the schedule and milestones. Most of the time, the software development projects are complex in nature, longer in durations, expectations are high, and things are broken down in a smaller sets. And when the overall project activity is divided into so many different parts, and of course, with every part, group, or activity, or the phase, or the process, some milestone needs to be determined, and along with the milestone, the activity needs to be scheduled. When and how these things are going to be completed. So, scheduled activities are part of that plan. Milestone and baseline elements are defined. Activity network diagram is illustrated. System component source are defined. Budget administration is worked out. Milestone payments, recommendations, follow-ups are described. Then major budgetary expenditures are critically focused. Those cannot be avoided. Those budgetary expenditures are going to be met as per the schedule. And lastly, the expenditure authorization procedures. If anything is required during the development process, this needs to be made available quickly and timely fashion. The fourth element in this regard is the risk analysis. We have talked about this in detail during the second topic when we were discussing software development fundamentals. I don't want to go into that detail, but I advise you to go back and refresh your memories about the topics which we have covered regarding risk analysis under second topic of software development fundamentals. Security. Security measures needs to be elaborated. Interface with external resources. You do have a control. You can manage the internal resources. What about the external resources? You don't want to have a control over the external resources, but you must have an interface with the external resources. Procedure for formal reviews. If you recall, we talk about formal technical reviews, FTRs. That is the thing which we are referring here. Procedure for formal reviews. Corrective action processes. If something goes wrong, if change is mandatory, cannot be avoided, there are certain areas, gray areas, which are required to be improved. There must be some control change mechanism. How the corrective action can be made against some problems or some improvement which has been recommended. You should have corrective action process recorded in that SDP step item. Next is problem change report. Whenever there is any change, there must be a mechanism or system which should report all these changes as per requirement. Now we come to another important factor of the step, that is software engineering. Software engineering considers, number one, standards and procedures, development methodology, development resources, personnel qualification and functions. All these things are defined in SDP with reference to the software engineering. Testing procedures. Depending upon the product requirement and the standards applied, testing procedures needs to be mentioned in the software development plan. Software configuration management. We had a detailed discussion on software configuration management in the previous sessions. I'm not going to repeat again now, but you must refer back and go back and read the software configuration management notes again, so that you are in line with what we are going to discuss in this one. Software quality assurance, we have talked about that. There are certain international, national standards which needs to be met. So these are the things we have already covered. But here, I just wanted to give you a reference that SDP includes all these input steps or parameters. For some of these we have already covered, and the others I have explained in this session now. Now move to the third factor, which is the inputs to SDP, Software Development Plan. After taking care of all the key steps, elements, procedures which we have discussed with reference to first two factors, there are some certain other things which are going to be used as input to the SDP. Other planning outputs, for example, that is the first. All of the outputs of the planning processes and the other knowledge areas are inputs for developing the project plan. You may call it lesson learned, you may call it reference to the similar kind of the project activities, some reports. These are the things which are taken from the experiences, from the reports which are made, which are available. So these should be used while preparing the SDP. One of the input to that is other planning outputs. Other planning outputs includes both base documents such as work breakdown structure and the supporting detail, so that you don't need to reinvent the wheel again. If you are having a similar kind of the project, you can benefit from the experience and the learning and the effort made in the other project. So you can use those things in this plan. Many projects will also require application area specific inputs. Most major projects will require a cash flow forecast and the technical input requirements into that. These project specific requirements, if you happen to come across with the knowledge or access to the information, that will be beneficial to develop, to use as input while you are developing the SDP for your existing assignment. Second is the historical information. The available historical information, estimating databases, records of the past project performance, etc., should have been consulted during the other project planning process. As we said in the beginning, planning should not be in secrets. Let the others know what you are planning and invite others to help you out in planning a better software development plan. For that, historical data is very, very important and is very helpful for the similar kind of nature of projects to build the software development. That historical information should also be available during project plan development to assist with verifying assumptions and assessing alternatives that are identified as part of this process. In fact, if you use the historical information, then you don't need to take a greater risk, or you don't need to think what mitigation should be against a certain type of risk which were experienced by other projects. So their remedies you can use as a input in your software development plan. Third input to SDP is organization policies. Any and all of the organizations involved in the project may have formal and informal policies whose effects must be considered. In fact, organization policies that typically must be considered include but are not limited to: number one, quality management, process audits, continuous improvement targets with reference to quality management, how they adhere to these things, personnel administration, hiring and firing guidelines, employee performance reviews, financial controls, time reporting, required expenditures and disbursement reviews, accounting codes, and standard contract provisions. These are the organizational policies. If more than one organization are involved in the production or designing of the project, then their policies needs to be known to the project managers while they are developing the software development plan. The fourth, we talk about the constraints. A constraint is an application restriction that will affect the performance of the project. Example, a predefined budget is a constraint that is highly likely to limit the team's option regarding scope, staffing, and schedule. There could be a situation where you have been asked to prepare the facility or develop the project in a given fixed budget. Naturally, then you have to trade off between different aspects, not to exceed the budget but still complete the job. It is going to limit. This is one of the constraints. It's not a bottleneck. It's a constraint. As a smart manager, you must have some trade-offs and manipulate the things accordingly. When a project is performed under contract, contractual provisions will generally be constraints. So as a project manager, you must understand in what condition you have been asked to develop this activity. Fifth is the assumptions. There could be a possibility that in a software project, which is large, complex, sizable in nature, you assume certain things, and on the basis of those assumptions, then you plan the things. So what are those kind of assumptions which should be referred, mentioned in the SDP? Let's talk about a little bit on this, about this. Assumptions are factors that for planning purposes are considered to be true, real, or certain. Illusions or unrealistic assumptions, the extreme situation should not be considered. When we talk about the assumptions should be true in nature, near to reality, and certain. In that sense, these kind of assumptions have been experienced in the similar or different kind of projects. Assumptions affects all aspects of project planning and are part of progressive elaboration of the project. So you have to be very smart when you are reviewing, analyzing the assumptions. Another point in this regard is the project teams frequently identify, document, and validate assumptions as part of their planning process. Let's talk about an example in this regard. If the date that a key person will become available is uncertain, the team may assume a specific start date. Assumptions generally involve a degree of risk. Now you know that there is a non-availability of that particular expert. Based upon that, the different dates, specific start dates have been planned. So that's one kind of the example. Or if you are assuming that a certain time is required to install a new facility, and then training also training is also required before putting that new machine, new tools and actions. We have assumed that X number of hours are required for the training and X number of week time is required for the installations. Then all other project related parameters, time bound parameters and usage parameters needs to be changed accordingly. So these were the things which we consider input to the software development plan. In today's session we discussed project planning. There were 6 aspects of project planning. We talked about planning objectives. Then we discussed some of the definitions related to project planning. We discussed 12 key tasks which needs to be performed during project planning process. Then we talked about primary planning steps, and then we talked about project management process, and lastly we refer to a planning puzzle illustration for the project manager to fix the things. Then we talked about software development plan, a very critical. We said the software development plan is the first formal document which is handed over to the project executioners. Out of 10 topics under software development plan, today we discussed the 3 topics. Information needs we talked in detail. Steps item required to develop SDP, we mentioned that. And lastly, we discussed the inputs required to prepare SDP. Those are the things which we discussed. The remaining 7 topics we'll discuss in the next session. Now is the time to conclude in today's session. اس کے بعد نیکسٹ سیشن میں آپ سے ملاقات ہوگی. اللہ حافظ.